Welcome into Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Today on the show was a tough loss last night for the Hawks. What they face the rest of the season and some Falcons D-line notes. It's all next. It's Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.
This is Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And it starts now.
Hittin Hard is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. You can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to all of your podcasts. Get the latest episodes of Hittin Hard when they become available. And you can give me a follow on my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. Well, was another blown lead last night. So I guess the good news in all of this is that both the Raptors and the Chicago Bulls lost last night. Now, we talked about this yesterday, about the idea of, okay, Toronto's at home. Could they tie the Hawks if the Hawks lose? Well, somehow Indiana beat Toronto on their home floor, which just kind of shows you where the bottom tier of the NBA is right now in the Eastern Conference. I mean, just none of those teams are any good, and you don't know night in, night out what you're going to get. But it was a double-digit lead for the Hawks that they blew again. Trey had a big night scoring, but he was 6 of 16 from the field overall. DeJounte Murray didn't play last night, and, it's kind of is what it is, right now. Now, the Atlanta Hawks, this is kind of fascinating when you look at this. The Atlanta Hawks are now 2-9 in the second half of back-to-back games. So games where there's no rest, no days off in between, right? The back-to-back thing that the NBA does. The Hawks are now 2-9 in those games. The other teams that are at or below what the Hawks are, the Mavericks are also 2-9. The Rockets are 2-10. That's maybe the worst team in the NBA. The Magic are 1-11 on the back end of a back-to-back. That's maybe the worst team in the Eastern Conference. And the San Antonio Spurs are 1-12. That's a team that, yes, we blew a 24-point lead to, but they're one of the worst teams in the NBA. So if you're looking for something to hang your hat on, this has been a disaster in these back-to-backs. You're at the bottom tier of the NBA. When you're dealing in teams like Orlando, Houston, San Antonio, you're the bottom sludge on the bottom of the barrel when all is said and done. Now, I guess it's good that the Hawks set an NBA record last night, right? This is now 26 games where the Hawks have been either one game or one game above or one game below 500. And that's what this season has become, right? And that's why we've said for weeks on this podcast, this idea of getting up to 6 and all this kind of stuff, brother, I'm just trying to hang on to the number 8 seed for dear life. And they're certainly getting some help because Chicago, Toronto, all losing. The bottom tier of that Eastern Conference really stinks. And the Hawks are right there in that mix. I mean, when you talk about Washington, Indiana, Chicago, Toronto, the Hawks are right there in that mix. We thought going into the season that the Hawks would be maybe closer to Boston, Philly, Milwaukee, right toward the top half of that Eastern Conference bracket. And this team is going to have to do some real soul searching because this roster is just not figuring out a way to get it done. And now you have to see about, because look, I think change is really coming. And I think it's going to be, yes, I do think that Nick Ressler and I think that Landry Fields and Kyle Korver will be on board with making some changes, and Quinn Snyder as well. They'll be on board. But this will be driven by Tony Ressler. Because, again, I don't think he's going to start living through seasons where we're sitting in that 8-9 seed and we're paying out all this money and we're never getting any better. We keep straddling that line of luxury tax and things like that. So I do think that this will be a very much influenced offseason by what Tony Russell wants to do. Not that he's going to make the basketball decisions, but the direction of what this franchise needs to be. I don't think they're going to trade Trae Young. I certainly think that if they could move Collins or Capella or DeAndre Hunter in a deal, they'd ship one or maybe multiple of those guys off. I do think that it will be interesting to see if they keep DeJounte Murray, because DeJounte Murray will probably be more valuable in the offseason to trade than he will be at the All-Star, on the trade deadline or toward the All-Star break, right? Because, again, if he's on an expiring contract and he's going to get all kinds of cash money, I don't know how many teams are going to want to take on that contract just because, okay, we got a good player and he doesn't cost you a whole lot of money, but if he just walks out the door, we've given up assets. Of course, that's where kind of the Hawks are sitting right now and everything with, having, 3 number 1 picks or whatever like that. And I'm not so much worried about the draft picks and things like that, but, you'd like to have something back for DeJounte Murray if he's not going to re-sign here. But it does make you wonder about whether or not DeJounte Murray will re-up with the Atlanta Hawks. Will he sign an extension? Would he be in the market, for that? I do think that he is going to test free agency. I don't think he completely rules out the Atlanta Hawks, but I do think that he's going to test free agency because he can make a lot more money. Even whether the Hawks retain his services or not, if he goes to the free agent market, he can make more money than he can signing an extension with the Atlanta Hawks. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago that, look, depending on what the new CBA is going to be and all that kind of stuff, with the percentage of how much you can pay a player on an extension, if that percentage moves up, maybe that makes it a little bit more attractive. But right now, this experiment hasn't really worked itself out. And we had so many expectations about the excitement level of the Atlanta Hawks. I mean, again, whether we're moving forward, in years gone by and all that kind of stuff and what we do, but for this season, we certainly had higher expectations. But we really are a bottom-tier team within the Eastern Conference of the NBA. We're way more like Toronto, Chicago, Indiana, and teams like that than we are Milwaukee, Boston, Philadelphia. Even the Knicks have passed us by. Even the Brooklyn Nets, with trading all of their superstars away, with all the guys that they traded away, right? Kyrie, Durant, whatever, with all trading those guys away, hey, they did themselves well. They did themselves well with bringing talent back. They got Dinwiddie and Mikal Bridges and guys like that. Okay, those are pretty good players. I'm not saying that they're Durant or Kyrie, but they've been pretty good. So if we clear things out, clear off the deck, don't just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. If we start to clear some things out, hopefully that with Quinn Snyder and this organization moving forward, that we can figure some things out. But next year is going to be a kind of must win for this franchise kind of year. Or if it's not any better than 7, 8, 9, they're going to blow this organization up. They'll give it, I think, one more year, but this organization will be blown up sooner rather than later. All right, let's talk about our friends over at FanDuel. Listen, FanDuel is America's #1 sports book, and as NCAA tournament action is starting up again tonight, we start the Sweet 16. By the end of the weekend, we'll be into the Final Four, and we'll know the matchups for all of that. If you're a new customer and you go to FanDuel.com today, you can claim your no-sweat first bet where you can get as much as $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on everything from money lines to point scores to the number of three-pointers drained, everything in between. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So head to FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON and claim your no-sweat first bet where you can get as much as $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. So looking at the Hawks' remaining schedule, this is not going to be an easy trek, okay? So we talk about just trying to wrap our arms around and hang on for dear life to the 8th seed. According to Tankathon, the Hawks have, are you ready for this? The second hardest remaining schedule in the NBA. Not just in the Eastern Conference, the entirety of the NBA. Only the Philadelphia Phillies have a harder strength of schedule left. The Hawks have games against, and these are all solo games, so there's nobody left that they play twice. But they play Boston, they play Philadelphia, they play Memphis, they play Cleveland, they play Brooklyn. Then they also play some of the lower tier teams, but Washington's already beaten us once, Indiana, Chicago, who we're competing against, and the Dallas Mavericks. So this is going to be tough sledding. And I was kind of looking at this. Listen, if the Hawks could find a way to go 5-4 in this whole thing, I would take that. I would take at this point 5-4 with the 9 games that we have left. Okay. Do I have a fear that we would be more like 3-6 because of some of the teams we play? Boston, Philly, Brooklyn, right? I mean, even the teams that are supposedly kind of scab teams, Chicago's got a lot to play for because they're trying to hang on for dear life to a playoff spot, to at least a play-in round. And I say playoff spot, these Fakakta play-in tournament games and stuff like that. But they're trying to hang on for dear life to a play-in round spot. Even teams like Indiana, we just talked about the idea of, the Hawks are hanging around that. So when you play Washington, Indiana, Chicago, like those teams are right at where the Hawks are. I mean, there's really no difference between the Hawks and where those teams are. So we say, like, we don't have any of the real scab teams, Detroit, Orlando, Houston, anybody like that. But, even the teams that we're playing that are non-playoff teams, we're right there in the mix with where those teams are. And again, we've talked about the idea of we don't know from night in, night out what we're going to get from this team. Do I think that the Hawks, when you look at what this schedule is, Boston, Philly, Memphis, Cleveland, Brooklyn, that's the teams that are above the Hawks right now. Okay, that five games. Let's just take that 5 games. Do I think that the Hawks could go 3-2 in that 5-game set? I mean, certainly the Hawks have the talent. Certainly the Hawks are capable of going 3-2. It's not like that those teams are so unbeatable. Again, they're not the Warriors from a few years ago, 72-10. But obviously, those are the top tier teams in the Eastern Conference. And most likely, if you get into the first round of the actual playoff, you probably very realistically are going to have to play either Milwaukee, Boston, or Philly, however that shakes itself out. And Philly's the hottest team in the NBA right now, right? They've been outstanding of late. Embiid is probably in line to win the MVP award. So, again, when you don't know what you're going to get, like the Hawks are not so bad that we're going to go 0-5 in a stretch like that. But they're not so good that we're 4-1 capable. We're literally living in that 2-3, 3-2. And again, if I can just get the Hawks to find a way to maybe be 5-4, maybe even 4-5 when all is said and done, as long as it's not 3-6 or 2-7 or something like that. But could the Hawks do that? Yeah, the Hawks could absolutely lay an egg like that. Now, when you look at a couple of the other teams that are around the Atlanta Hawks that, fighting for all these playoff spots, Toronto has the 13th hardest schedule in the NBA. Washington has the 17th hardest schedule in the NBA. The Bulls have the 21st hardest schedule in the NBA. Miami is 23rd on this list. New York is 29th. Cleveland is 30th. They have the easiest schedule moving forward. So unfortunately, a lot of the teams that you're right, in the mix with that are uh, of several spots above you or kind of right in the mix of, right below you, they have a little bit easier schedule. I mean, obviously, with the Hawks having the second toughest schedule remaining out there, everybody's going to be that. But there is a pretty good gap when you talk about where the Raptors and Bulls are and things like that versus where the Hawks are. So, again, we've talked about this. Just wrap your arms around the idea of the 8th seed and just hang on to it for dear life. Like a ship that's capsizing and, about to fall, tip over in the ocean. Just wrap your arms around the idea of just being that 8th seed. The schedule itself is not going to be very easy. And as long as you can be just, again, what we've been all year, a game above 500 at 5-4, a game below 500 at 4-5, we can just kind of get into that realm. I'm not expecting 6-3 or 7-2. But I do feel like, if this thing starts to go sideways a little bit, I do wonder about whether or not we would put up a 3-6 or a 2-7. I would hope that's not the case, and I would hope that this team would fight for its play-in spot. But with only a game separating Toronto, a game and a half separating the Bulls at this point, and again, you got some good fortune last night that those teams weren't able to close the gap on the Hawks. I don't know where we're going to be with all of this. So anyway, after making Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery your first listen every day, make sure you make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Biggest stories of the day, instant reaction, big game recaps, and the take of the day. You can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. So a couple of thoughts on the Falcons defensive line that have popped up here the last day or so. So we saw that Eddie Goldman is now coming out of retirement, and the Falcons are signing him. Okay. Kind of scratching my head here about what happened with Eddie Goldman. Now, look, is Eddie Goldman a game changer, different things like that? No, but he is a nice rotational piece. I mean, he is a guy that he's got the size, right? 6'3", 325 pounds. He's had some success. He's obviously been a starter a lot. So you could put him in the rotation. Is he really productive? I mean, he was a few years ago, but the last couple of years, he's only grabbed, 2021 was the last time he played. Half a sack that year. 2019, he had 1 sack. He didn't play in the COVID year. I don't know if it was because of injury or what have you, but so again, this is just a depth piece that maybe we were a little bit more excited about come the beginning of last season, that maybe he could help out before we saw that Taquan Graham kind of jumped up forward because we didn't know exactly what he was going to be. And anybody that we can line up next to Grady that's a bigger body and help Grady Jarrett out, okay. So again, I'm not bothered by this move or whatever like that. It's just rotational depth at this point. You saw that Abdullah Anderson, who I would have rather had Abdullah Anderson over Eddie Goldman, but okay, Anderson signed somewhere else, and now he's off to greener pastures and all that. So if Eddie Goldman can come out of retirement and help this all, and God knows he should be pretty well rested. I mean, he's 29 years old. He's going to be 30 come January of next year, but God knows he should be rested. He didn't play at all last year, retired last year, and didn't play in the COVID year either. So he should be like physically ready to go and all that kind of stuff. Maybe he can give us some kind of boost or bounce back, but again, we'll see. Now, the other note on the Falcons defensive line that is intriguing is the idea that Calais Campbell is scheduled for an interview with the Atlanta Falcons. Now, when we're talking about pass rushers for the Baltimore Ravens, I would tell you that I would rather have Justin Houston or Ngakoue, but Calais Campbell is definitely a guy that I'm intrigued by. Now, he's 36 years old. He's going to be 37 by the time the season starts. 5.5 sacks last year. Only had 1.5 sacks in 2021. And obviously, he's been a high caliber guy. He's had years where he finished second in the NFL in Defensive Player of the Year in 2017. So he's obviously had a little bit of production, but obviously all of that has kind of gone down as you're getting to 36, 37 years old. But if he can work with and teach some of these guys or mentor some of these guys and understand he's 6'8", 300 pounds. And this is one of those other reasons why I would love to see a Keon White be here. A guy who's got the thickness and the size and things like that Calais Campbell has as well. More than Nolan Smith or guys like that are 238 pounds. And it's not that Calais Campbell couldn't work with and teach some of those guys some of those things, but certainly Ebiketie or a Keon White, guys that he could have a real influence on. I'm all for that. And I don't know if this is a situation where, remember in the Super Bowl year that, they had Dwight Freeney that was on the roster, I think the year before in 2015, and he was working with Vic Beasley and, trying to mentor him and all that kind of stuff. And then in 2016, Vic Beasley had his breakout year. He led the NFL in sacks and was the second most important reason why we were in the Super Bowl, next to Matt and his performance that year. Vic Beasley had that one big breakout season. And for all of Vic Beasley's, faults and warts and different things like that, even a guy who could get you 7 or 8 sacks, I'd kill for that right now. Like somebody who could consistently get you 7 or 8 sacks right now, but be that what it is. But again, I don't know if this is going to be a situation where Calais Campbell looks at an organization like the Falcons, and he's going to have some suitors out there. There's talk about whether or not he would go back to Baltimore. But my preference would be if I could have some of those older defensive guys, and not that Ngakoue is all that old, he's 27 years old, but I would certainly much rather roll the dice, honestly, on a Justin Houston or an Ngakoue first and foremost, where you could line one of those guys up and just come right off the edge and in a rotational role and things like that and see what kind of production that they have. Or even, again, work with our young pass rushers, whether it's Malone, whether it's Ebiketie, even teaching Lorenzo Carter or something. But again, I like the idea of having Calais Campbell in the mix, and he's coming here to interview. I wonder if he is not going to be a guy that finds himself on a roster that is more Super Bowl competent, right? Like there's rumors that the Buffalo Bills, I think they're going to have him in to talk as well. And with all due respect, okay, and I'm saying this with all due respect because it's in the Geneva Convention, if it's the Buffalo Bills, all right, or it's the Atlanta Falcons, who do you think I'm picking? Like Buffalo's a Super Bowl caliber team. They are Super Bowl caliber level. I mean, when you get to be 36, 37 years old, I think that you're looking for a more Super Bowl appearance. Now, look, again, Falcons have the division wide open and they could win and this, that, and the other. But with all due respect, we can't compare where Buffalo is in the year of our Lord 2023 versus where the Falcons are in the year of our Lord 2023. Like those two organizations are not even comparable. But maybe he looks at the Falcons as a team that he can come in, mentor some. Maybe he's thinking about, in the future, if he wants to get into coaching or different things like that. I don't know what his mindset is. I don't know where he's at right now. But could he come in and be a piece that is part of a rotation? Sure. He's a guy that can come in and help out. Look, he started 14 games last year. Last 2 years, he's made 28 starts in the last 2 years. So he could still be, if you get somebody injured or somebody hurt, or if you want to start the year off with, again, if we draft number 8 and it's a defensive edge kind of player, you could start Ebiketie and a Calais Campbell until your number 8 pick is ready to step in and produce, right? And remember, Ebiketie only started 1 game last year. So when this team talks about its young guys, Grant didn't hardly start. Grant only played 20% of the snaps his rookie year. Ebiketie only started 1 game last year. They've been hesitant, obviously the whole, Desmond Ridder thing, but obviously they've been hesitant to throw their rookies into the fire, other than Jalen Mayfield, who was the worst offensive lineman in the league. They were thrilled to do that. But anyway, that's a whole nother discussion for another day. But I like the idea of a Calais Campbell to be here and maybe mentor and produce on the field. So if he does decide to go with the Atlanta Falcons, hey, more power to him. I mean, I would not be angry about that. Every even 5 or 5.5 sack guy that we can gets us that many sacks closer to 38. Because until you tell me that we're going to be a 38-40 sack team in this league, I'm not believing playoffs or anything like that. I'll stick to my guns until I see it all happen. As the Ghostbusters said, we are ready to believe you. All right, well, thank you so much for making Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery your first listen every day. Make sure you make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Of course, they are for free on Odyssey, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from. We ask you to subscribe or follow us for free on YouTube, Locked On Sports Atlanta. You can get the latest episodes of Hittin' Hard when they are available to you. And then give me a follow on my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. Back with you tomorrow. This has been Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.